أعزائي طلبة المرحلة الثانية، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Our lecture today is about the anatomy of the small intestine, or another name for the small intestine is the small bowel. In general, the small intestine it is a muscular tube that is lined by mucous membrane. It is the longest part of the GI tract. Longest part of the GI tract that from the first look we can appreciate that it is located at the central part of the abdominal cavity. Because it is the longest part of the GI tract, this is the main site for digestion and absorption of food. And it can be divided into three parts for descriptive purposes, which is the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. We can see that the small intestine is surrounded by the large intestine, which lie at the periphery of the abdominal cavity. The main parts of the small intestine, as we said, the first proximal part is the duodenum, next is the jejunum, and lastly is the ileum that it will end with the cecum. Small intestine begin from the pylorus of the stomach down to the ileocecal junction with the cecum. First, we will take the first part, which is the duodenum. Duodenum, this is a C-shaped muscular tube that extend in the epigastric and umbilical region. It continue from the pylorus of the stomach, to the duodenojejunal junction. So it will act as a connection in between the stomach and the jejunum. So it is a C-shaped tube, is retroperitoneal except its first hinge, that is tethered to the posterior abdominal wall by the peritoneum. يعني راح يكون it is partially surrounded by the peritoneum except the first hinge to receive the opening of the bile and pancreatic duct in its second part, and it curves around the head of the pancreas. This is the head of the pancreas. This C-shaped tube it will curve around the head of pancreas. For descriptive purposes, we can divide the duodenum into four parts. The first part, which lie at the level of the first lumbar vertebra at the transpyloric plane. The second part, which is called the descending part, that lie on the side of the second and third lumbar vertebra, which receive the opening of the bile and pancreatic ducts. And the third, or the horizontal part, which lies at the level of the third lumbar vertebra, the subcostal plane. And the last part, or the fourth part, which is the shortest one, that lie on the left side of the second lumbar vertebra that end with the duodenojejunal junction. The first hinge of the first part of the duodenum, this part, it will resemble the stomach in that it is covered on its anterior and posterior surfaces with peritoneum. That is, has the lesser omentum attached to its upper border and the greater omentum attached to its lower border. What is its superior relation? This is the first part of the duodenum that lies at the transpyloric plane. Its superior relation is the entrance into the lesser sac. The entrance into the lesser sac, or the what we call the epiploic foramen. The epiploic foramen. This is the superior relation of the first part of the duodenum. What is its anterior relation? We can see from this figure, it is the gallbladder that lies anteriorly with the quadrate loop of the liver. what is its posterior relation? The first part of the duodenum, there are important relation to the first part. Posteriorly is the lesser sac, which is the first inch only, the gastroduodenal artery, which is a branch from the hepatic artery, gastroduodenal artery, the bile duct, the portal vein, and more posteriorly is the inferior vena cava. The importance of this relation is that when there is an peptic ulcer in the posterior wall of the duodenum, it might erode the wall and reach to this artery, and this artery might be involved by the duodenal ulcer. What is the inferior relation? We can see is the head of the pancreas. Another figure showing the posterior relation. This is the posterior relation of the first part of the duodenum. This we can see this is the lesser sac and first inch only. Another important relation is the bile duct, gastroduodenal artery, portal vein, and more posteriorly is the inferior vena cava. This is the gastroduodenal artery, and we can see how it is related to the posteriorly to the first part of the duodenum. The second part of the duodenum, or what we call the descending part of the duodenum, we can see that it is related anteriorly to the fundus of the gallbladder. This is the fundus of the gallbladder related to the second part. Also, the right lobe of the liver also related to the second part of the duodenum anteriorly. Laterally, here we can see it is related to the ascending colon and the right colic flexure. Also, the transverse colon will pass anterior to the second part of the duodenum. The second part of the duodenum, or the descending part, it descends in front of the hilum of the right kidney. In front of the hilum of the right kidney. This is an important relation to the second part of the duodenum. The right kidney posteriorly. Right kidney posteriorly. The medial relation is the pancreas, head of the pancreas with the bile and pancreatic duct that open into at the middle of the second part of the duodenum. This is the site of the entrance of the common bile duct. It will be the line of demarcation between the foregut above and the midgut below. The common bile duct and pancreatic duct will open in the second part of the duodenum, and it will cause elevation of the mucous membrane, and we can call this elevation is the major duodenal papilla. Major duodenal papilla. The third part of the duodenum, or it is called the transverse part, runs horizontally in front of the vertebral column at the level of the subcostal plane, at the level of all three, and it have an important relation anteriorly and posteriorly. Here we can see that it is related anteriorly to the root of the mesentery. With the superior mesenteric vessels contained within the root of the mesentery. With the coils of the jejunum. Posteriorly, this is the transverse part of the duodenum. Posterior is related to the right ureter, to the right psoas muscle, to the inferior vena cava, and to the aorta. إذا نشوف هنا الصورة أوضح posterior relation of the third part. This is the third part of the descending of the duodenum. Posterior relation is the right ureter, right psoas muscle, inferior vena cava, and the aorta. The fourth part of the duodenum that extend upward and to the left until it reaches what we call the duodenojejunal flexure, or the duodenojejunal junction at the level of L2, is related anteriorly to the beginning of the root of the mesentery. This is the beginning of the root of the mesentery related to the fourth part and to the coils of jejunum. Posteriorly, it is related to the left margin of the aorta. This is the aorta. It is related to the fourth part of the duodenum, posteriorly, left margin of the aorta, and the medial border of the psoas muscle, left psoas muscle. هنا وصلنا إلى نهاية الدودينم اللي هو الفورث بارت. راح تبدي عندنا دودينو جوجينال جنكشن، دودينو جوجينال جنكشن، أو نسميه دودينو جوجينال flexure, because there is an angle between the duodenum and jejunum. This duodenojejunal junction is held by what we call the ligament of Treitz. Ligament of Treitz, this is regarded an important landmark for the surgeon to remark the beginning of the jejunum from this ligament. This ligament, or ligament of Treitz, or the suspensory muscle of the duodenum, it is a fold of peritoneum that is attached to the right crus of the diaphragm. It will form just like a sling that hold the duodenojejunal junction in position. The ligament of Treitz at the level of L2. Essentially, the interior of the duodenum, يعني the lining of the duodenum or the mucous membrane of the duodenum, we can see that there is a permanent circular folds inside the duodenal wall. This is called plici circularis. We can see also there is that the first inch of the duodenum is smooth. Here it is smooth, the mucous membrane is smooth, and this is part is called the duodenal cap. While the remaining part of the duodenum containing these circular folds that are permanent circular folds called plici circularis. At the mid of the descending part of the duodenum, or the second part of the duodenum, we have the presence of the major duodenal papilla, which is caused by the entrance of the common bile duct and the pancreatic duct. These are the common bile duct with the pancreatic duct will form a common ampulla that open into the second part of the duodenum and causes elevation of the mucous membrane in what we call the major duodenal papilla. طبعا هذا bile duct is guarded by a sphincter, and this sphincter is called sphincter of Oddi, or the sphincter of hepatopancreatic ampulla. What is the blood supply of the duodenum? Because the duodenum, part of it, that is above the entrance of the bile duct, is related to the foregut, and part of it, lower part, is related to the midgut. So it derives its blood supply from the celiac artery and from the superior mesenteric artery. هيكون أنه upper parts through the superior pancreatico-duodenal artery, which is a branch from the gastro-duodenal artery, which is a branch from the hepatic that originates from the celiac trunk, while the inferior pancreatico-duodenal artery is a direct branch from the superior mesenteric artery. كذلك lymphatic drainage, the part of the duodenum above the entrance of the bile duct will drain through the superior pancreatico-duodenal lymph node to the gastro-duodenal lymph node to the celiac nodes, while the inferior part to the inferior pancreatico-duodenal lymph node and then to the superior mesenteric nodes. كذلك nerve supply راح يكون the upper part of the duodenum is supplied from branches from the celiac plexus, while the lower part from the site of the entrance of the bile duct and lower down supplied by branches from the superior mesenteric plexus. Jejunum and ileum. It measures about 6 meters. The upper 2/5 make up the jejunum, while the lower 3/5 is the ileum. Jejunum begins at the duodenojejunal flexure, as we said before, and the ileum ends at the ileocecal junction. This is the jejunum, upward and to the left below the transverse mesocolon. This is the transverse mesocolon, and the ileum downward and to the right below the transverse colon. How it is attached to the posterior abdominal wall? The jejunum and ileum is attached by the mesentery. This is the mesentery, which is a double fold of peritoneum attached to the small intestine to the posterior abdominal wall. Through this mesentery, we can see how the blood vessels and arteries, veins, and nerves will pass, lymphatics will pass to the small intestine. Mesentery طبعا attached to the posterior abdominal wall in a line that runs from the left side of the second lumbar vertebra downward and to the right to reach the area of the right sacroiliac joint. This is the root of the mesentery, or the attached border, downward and to the right. يعني راح يكون root of the mesentery and duodenojejunal junction from the L2, from the left side of the L2 downward and to the right across the midline to the right sacroiliac joint, Through the root of the mesentery, the blood vessels, different blood vessels, lymphatics and nerves will pass to supply the intestine. What are the differences in between the jejunum and ileum? We can see from this figure. The jejunum is wider bore than the ileum, it is thicker wall, and it is more red in color, and there is differences in the blood supply and arrangement of the blood vessel. And also in the mucosa, there is differences in the mucosa. There is more extensive and well developed plici circularis in the mucous membrane of the jejunum, while it is more scanty or even absent at the last part of the ileum. Instead, in the ileum, we have the presence of aggregation of lymphoid tissue, which is called Byers patches. Here we can see the mucosa of the jejunum and the mucosa of the ileum, and we can see how the plici circularis is well developed in the jejunum, and it is scanty or even absent in the ileum. And in the last part of the ileum, we can see the presence of Byers patches. طبعا هذا راح ينعكس، هذا الاختلاف بالميوكوزا راح ينعكس أيضا على شكلها بالإيميجينج، يعني بالأشعة راح تظهر بشكل مختلف، يعني الجوجينوم راح يختلف عن الإيليوم بسبب اختلاف الميوكوزا. These are the summary of the differences in between jejunum and ileum regarding the length. يعني length راح يكون هنا اعتيادي jejunum short the upper 2/5 بينما ileum راح يكون longer distal 3/5 diameter, wall thickness, appearance in general, vessels, arrangement of the arcades, mesenteric fats, where lymphoid tissue. Also there is a differences in between jejunum and ileum. The blood supply of the jejunum and ileum is derived from the superior mesenteric artery. From the left side of the superior mesenteric artery, there are jejunal and ileal branches, and we can see how the differences of the arrangement of the arterial arcade in between the jejunum and ileum. This is the superior mesenteric artery. From its left side, we can see these are the jejunal and ileal branches. The differences in the arcades here يعني راح يكون الجejunum have a fewer arcade than that of the ileum. Ileum have more arrangement of arcades, more number of arcades. Also the fat distribution, this is in the yellow color, the fat distribution راح يكون more abundant in the mesentery of the ileum than that of the jejunum. The lymphatics of the jejunum and ileum, يعني how the jejunum and ileum are drained by lymphatics. It will drain through series of lymph node in the mesentery that is called mesenteric lymph node until it reach to the main lymph nodes that are arranged around the superior mesenteric artery, which is called the superior mesenteric lymph nodes. Superior mesenteric lymph node around the origin of the superior mesenteric artery. The nerve supply of the jejunum and ileum is through the superior mesenteric plexus. Superior mesenteric plexus to supply sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves for the autonomic supply, for the small intestine, for the function, for the movement, and for the secretion of the gland. Thank you.